All right, hi folks, this is Mr. Powell again as a part of the Knowable World student interview series. I have Ryder with me here today. Ryder is one of my junior high students, and we're going to be discussing Japanese history. So Ryder, the way that we want to do this, of course, is exactly how we do it in Knowable World, meaning that we're going to be explaining to the folks here what happened in the story of Japan, of course. But in Knowable World, we always set the context of world history as a whole. So go ahead and do that for folks by telling us what kind of world it is that we live in that we're seeking a revelation and explanation of. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, the world we live in is an interconnected agglomeration of nearly 200 countries organized into 10 major cultural blocks and others, mainly controlled by 5 cardinal cultures in which the United States is primacy.
All right, fantastic. That's what we do at Knowable World. We take the 200 countries, we organize them into 10 cultural blocks, and of which 5 are, as we call them, cardinal, the top most important ones. Where does Japan sit in that structure of ours, right? What kind of culture is it?
Well, Japan is not a cardinal culture, which means it's not like one of the most important ones, but it is still an important one in terms of the way that the world is set. So it's a major culture, but so it's not quite cardinal culture level, but it is still not like a super dud culture.
Okay, what can you elaborate a little bit? What are the features of Japan that make it a major culture in the world?
A cardinal culture has to have the will and the way to, so in other words, it has to have the power to be a cardinal culture and to change the world, and it has to want to. But Japan, it has I'd say has the power to, but it just doesn't want to, or it, not that it doesn't want to, but it got defeated really badly in World War II and then signed the contract saying that they wouldn't do any more wars or anything, and it's going to be really hard to be a cardinal culture without fighting wars, so I have a feeling that's not going to happen anytime soon.
That's a really deep statement, actually, because that's almost one of the defining features of cardinal cultures is they get involved in wars. Okay, so what are Japan's strengths, though, especially, and people would be probably pretty familiar with?
I'd say technology is a huge strength. A lot of our modern technology comes from Japan, a lot of car brands, a lot of video games, a lot of trains, a lot of everything comes from there. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I love to eat sushi. How about you?
Yeah, I love sushi.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, and martial arts, I think you're into that too, aren't you? Yeah, see, so Japan, okay, and manga and all that kind of stuff as well. So there's so many interesting things from Japan. All right, so now let's be more precise. Because, as you said, Japan really doesn't have the will to change the world. You mentioned World War II is a really crucial factor there. So what's our definitive statement concerning Japan as a culture today that helps to focus our study of history?
It's a post-imperial culture, which means it was after an empire, so it doesn't really have a clear set of answers at the moment, because if they're just post-imperial, they're not actually something really yet. That's why they're like, for example, the Islamic world, it knows what it is, not necessarily great, but it knows what it is, so is still cardinal culture at the moment just because it's driving toward their definition of themselves. But because Japan doesn't really have that, they're just in the mist, not really knowing what to do at the moment. But
really good. You actually just conjured an image for me of the Japanese gods in the mist. As they were Izanagi and Izanami. We didn't talk about them much because it's just a myth, but basically the Japanese believe that brother-sister pair are responsible for creating the islands of Japan. And I think about the mist, Japanese paintings often feature that. Okay,
nice.
So post-imperial culture, and so because it used to be an empire and now it really doesn't have a clear direction or purpose, it's just going along. It's not as if life is bad in Japan. The standard of living is very high, but on the other hand, it's a culture that's lost its way. It's not clear what Japan is going to be in the future. Okay, so Japan is a post-imperial culture today. Let's now dive into its history in order to understand where that comes from So talk us through the origin story of Japan, because obviously when it comes to superheroes and supervillains, yeah, it's always about the origin story, right? So what's the origin story of Japan?
Japanese history starts in circa 660 BC with Amaterasu and Jimmu. Well, Amaterasu is a Japanese god that basically is the start of the Japanese culture and the Japanese world. So it's a big part for Japanese history and people that they look back on to kind of signal where they started. And then Jimmu is Amaterasu's son.
According to Japanese belief, of course.
Right, yeah.
Gives birth to a man, and now he's divine, right? And that's part of Shintoism. Okay, good. So Shinto culture is something that we don't exactly do a deep dive on, but we sense the basics of it. As you said, it's a monarchy. And how does that monarchy evolve over time? What do we know about that?
Japanese monarchy keeps developing with the shogun and shogun and emperor duarchy, which kind of are those two main characters that are a form of the Japanese government, which basically starts with the emperor, rules everybody, but never gets his hands dirty, where the shogun orders around all the samurai and even gets in the dirty work sometimes himself to do all the killing people if they're not doing what the emperor wants or something like that, just all the dirty work for the emperor.
Okay, threatening his power in any way. So we don't have to talk about the dynasties for one thing. Why?
Okay, so we don't have to talk about the dynasties because there's only one dynasty. There is not dynasties, plural.
Okay, there's only one. And it develops over time. Sure, it's a divinely appointed dynasty, but the practical reality is that you have to have people doing your dirty work. So that's where we get this guy called the shogun. And that's mostly about controlling Japan and its own internal affairs, which is really not terribly significant now that we live in the 21st century now. So we don't pay an awful lot of attention to that. What happens in Japanese history that carries the older version of Japan to the modern version? What's the transformation?
The transformation process, I'd say, would be 1543/9, which is M&Ms, is how I remember it. It's merchants and missionaries. The merchants and missionaries come from Europe to try to basically trade with Japan, and it would have been great for Japan just to accept them and grow them a lot. So Japan accepted the merchants, the traders, because they saw that they had stuff that Japan wanted. They were ahead of Japan, so they just took on humility in order to trade with them. But then when the missionaries came, the Christian missionaries, they did not want that. And the reason why was because they have very strong religious beliefs there that really do involve the emperor quite a bit. And so the emperor did not want other religions crossing over into Japan, and he really didn't like that. So they just...
Especially because the Christians are coming with a message, and how does that affect the divinity of the emperor?
Oh, because part of their thing is a divine right kingship, which means that there is only, or that Christians think there's only one God, and Japanese religion thinks that there is multiple gods, and that doesn't play over. The king has just a lot to do with that, so he just didn't want that happening.
All right, so the Christians are coming with this message of the one true God, and that's not welcome to the emperor. What are the consequences going to be of Christian missionaries?
So they're either going to send all of the Christians out of the country and never welcome them back in, or the ones that choose to stay are not going to remember tomorrow. So that...
Why is that?
So they will get killed by the shogun. And so this kind of is starting Sakoku a little bit, and Sakoku is a Japanese period of history where they don't let anybody in their country, and anyone that comes into their country of Japan will get killed by the shogun. So
Why did they go so extreme? What triggered the extremity of that policy?
A big part of it is also the Shimabara Rebellion in 1637, where basically they just rebelled against the emperor.
Right, so the emperor said, no more Christians, Sakoku time. Okay, so now we're going to be isolated. And Japan upheld that policy for a few years, but not the case anymore, even though, yes, Japan is not a particularly welcoming country. If you go there as a tourist, no problem. But back then, no tourists either. All right, so what brought the Sako policy to an end? Japan doesn't have that anymore. So when did it end and why?
Yeah, so it ended in 1853/4 with Perry and Kanagawa. And Perry is an American that ends up going to Japan and basically offers to trade with Japan. And this was not the smartest idea at the moment because Japan is still in its Sakoku period at this moment. And so you already know what that means. Anyone that tries to come in or trade will die. So we'll see what happens.
Hold on a second, because Perry was not really just an explorer. Okay, he was sent, just to remind you, because it's been a while.
Yeah.
Just in case people don't know, it's been months since Ryder and I covered this material. So he's just going from memory, and pretty impressive. But yeah, there might be some hangups here. So Perry was an American naval officer, and he's practicing a certain kind of diplomacy here. What do we call it?
Gunboat diplomacy, that's right. Which is basically where you send all your boats, gunboat diplomacy, and into a certain spot on the border of a country, in this case Japan, and then says, all right, if you don't talk, then we'll blow you up, or we'll raid you, or whatever. And so Japan just goes, we actually really despise this. This is super annoying. We want to kill you. But they realized they had no choice, so they just decided to talk and decided to trade instead.
Yeah, so they agreed to the Treaty of Kanagawa in 1854. Okay, but as you said, they didn't like it. So what did they subsequently do?
Japanese kept continuing and ignoring America when they started their empire and the imperialism chapter. And the empire was getting very big, and it actually started to creep into a big part of China, the Philippines, all the things down south from Japan. And so that's when everyone started to get a little bit nervous. And so thus leading to World War II in Asia, 1937-45, where everyone just started fighting back against Japan's empire. After that, Japan seemed to be holding up fine until America entered the war. And then when America faced Japan, it was quite deadly for Japan and ended up nuking them, or with nuclear bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And they just said, Japan, if you don't surrender right now, it's going to happen more. So either it's your choice, but either you're dead or you have to live with crick in your neck. They chose to live with your neck. So
you're alive. And so what do we call that kind of situation at the end of a war when one country is completely defeated?
Unconditional surrender is when they don't have anything. They don't have we'll surrender if there's this. They surrender, and then they do almost whatever America says.
All right, so that brings us to the final segment, effectively, of Japanese history. All right, so far so good, basically. Post-imperial culture is not very dynamic. It's not super exciting, but it's actually a peaceful part of the world we live in. So if Japan can avoid disappearing through population collapse, then yeah, Japan's going to end up doing all right. It's a wonderful place to live, high technology and high standard of living. So cool. All right, Ryder, thank you for walking us through Japanese history. And all right, excellent. You and I got to go get ready for another class. We're doing our special topics session. Currently, we're studying the history of Iran. So yeah, we cover a wide range of topics at Knowable World. And Japan's a major culture, and who knows, maybe Ryder and I will get together again and discuss perhaps India or some other culture in the near future. I would look forward to that. So thank you, Ryder. It's been a pleasure, and so we'll sign off now.